Hello and welcome to episode 7 of series 1, The Peoples of Chult and the Chultan Peninsula. I'm your guide Graham, and this is Lore Diver, the podcast about lore, world building, and alternative takes on the stuff that we talk about to, maybe improve your game a bit. So, a bit of a technical issues going on there last week. I was unable to broadcast, so this week we're back on track, and I'm excited to be talking about the Pterafolk, sorry. Didn't mean to pronounce that hard P there. So what the Pterafolk are is they are the second to last in the scaled peoples of Chult. So we're almost done. We started with the Surrock. We've gone through the Yuan Ti. We've talked about the Lizardfolk. Now we're talking about Pterafolk. Next week I'll be talking about Nagas. And then we're done as far as the official scaled folk go, but there's still like turtles and fire newts and a few other reptilian sort of potential player races that we're going to be covering. So not out of the woodwork yet as far as that goes, but Pterafolk, time to have some fun. So let's look at their history in the editions. So they arrived on the scene in 2nd edition, billed as the Pteramen. And they were a serious threat in Chult and to the rest of the peninsula. Essentially, they were part of the Animal Man series of creatures. There was Lizard Man, all sorts of stuff like that. And, Pteramen, there's that hard P again. Pteramen was the creation for Chult. There is no creator race expansions at this point, so their origin was in question. There's a lot of little notes all through their appearances in 2nd edition talking about how nobody really knew where they're from, who they were, what they were, who made them, and sages were sort of discussing, maybe they were made from lizard men or done something nobody really knew. So it was sort of a big question mark. And this edition, one of the key things about them was that they had a natural transformation ability. It was a natural polymorphing ability, and at will, they could cause their wings to appear or disappear and become tiny pteranodons with like a 15-foot wingspan at will. And that's really cool. And throughout the art, of course, there's all sorts of conflicting depictions because different artists took what should have been a very straightforward description in some very, very different directions. And so in some cases, you'll see them as described where their arms become their wings. And then in other ones, you'll see them with like gargoyle style, where they have independent arms and then have wings coming out of their backs. And it's sort of, they don't really have prehensile feet. Like they've got feet with grasping talons, but they aren't fully prehensile, and so it's really kind of an issue with the look cool factor versus a functional factor. The look cool factor, like their arms turning into wings, way cooler looking than them just spurting a set of wings like a gargoyle. On the other hand, by spurting a set of wings like a gargoyle, it actually makes them able to use weapons, carry things and drop stuff with accuracy, all that sort of thing. So I'm on the fence about it. Like I can't decide which depiction I like best, but there's sort of that issue with art. The other things that come up in this is that they primarily fight the Batiri, goblins, who they compete with for territory and prey, I guess. And that there's no religion, and like so many other monster races in D&D, they just have a nonsense culture. It's like they're 100% self-centered and only do what they want, but also somehow like live in groups where they're dominated by the strongest, but they also mate for life and then lovingly raise their little eggs together until they become adults, and then they like drive them away as fast as possible so they can't can't compete for food. And so it's like all these really bizarre mixed messages coming out of the cultural design for them that just makes them into sort of like another non-functional social animal in the game. So But that was second edition. Their big appearance that was in the jungles of Chult, and they appear again in several other books that reference back to events in Chult, and they are a threat to the entire area. Like basically, if they can fly there, they're a problem. Third edition, upgraded, scarier, more of a challenge. I love it. So, third edition sees a massive set of improvements laid out for the Pterafolk. First and foremost, they are connected back to the Suruk, which is the creator race I talked about back. I think it was like episode, what was it, like 4 or 5? And the Suruk created almost all the scaled folk in Forgotten Realms, and the Pteramen were one of the races they created. It was really cool, actually. They were listed as being the third race they created after they created the Lizardfolk and the Asabi. The Asabi being a desert-dwelling Lizardfolk variant. They're really cool. They're up in like Anarok and a few other places. They're actually they're really cool. I would cover them in this series, but there's no deserts, so they're going to have to wait their turn. Anyways, so that's awesome. They get some history. They get locked into the realms a little bit better. That's looking good. They retain their ability to transform. It's an at-will action. It takes a full round, but they still have all their transformation abilities. It's still a natural power, and it's more in a reflection of the Suruks adapting to the sorts of battles and conflicts they were in at the time, which, again, pretty cool. This edition adds an arcane magic aversion. They don't like arcane magic. However, they've also been paired up with spirit nagas, which provide them with divine magic and also train Pterafolk who are capable of learning it in divine magic, which is awesome because like a Pterafolk is fairly terrifying in this edition as is, but now every so often you might run into one who has a few levels of cleric on top of being a monster, and that's awesome. And they also get like a divine update. Previously they had no religion, they didn't have any deities that they followed, which sure, I guess. But now they're following, and I'm going to try to pronounce this, Shekinester? Not sure how to pronounce this. Anyways, this is the five-faced queen, a Naga goddess. And as far as deities go, she's pretty awesome, actually. Like, there's 5 different versions of her, with alignments ranging from, I think there's a neutral good one to like a lawful evil one, and it's all sorts of aspects. It's really cool. She's probably worth an entire episode, or at least like part of an episode, to talk about in of herself, and I may talk about her more heavily next week with the Nagas. But she is their deity. They aren't following anybody else, and this is good, except for one of the things is that they don't really reflect any aspects of her because they left a lot of the cultural stuff about them the same. So there's still sort of this conflicting mess, and it's just I don't know. So you got a question here. Faiths of Chult series. That may indeed happen in the future. There's a lot of stuff that's going on in Chult, and with the just the cosmology around it, and the religious aspects of the area are very much worth an episode in of themselves. So that may happen. Good question there. So yeah, that's third edition. Pretty much everything else stays the same. They are terrifying dinosaur people and good to go. Fourth edition. I've got crickets and tumbleweeds written down here. No references found. I went through the books, went through the PDFs, scanned for everything I could imagine. Eventually was just scanning for Ptera, like Ptera, and nothing flashed up. So there's no references at all to them. I can only assume, based on the information gleaned about the Suruk, where there's a lot of that some of them may be engaged in being brought back on side by the Suruk to go to war for them. Fair. It's what they were made for. So, 5th edition. The current edition. Well, what are we? Something? Does anyone remember what's going on? It's just so confusing and not fun and a mess. Wow. So, they are back. They make their triumphant reappearance in the Tomb of Annihilation, and they are listed among the peoples of Chult. They are listed as being natural enemies of the Aarakocra, which 100% makes sense. I don't know why that wasn't mentioned in 1993's Jungles of Chult, because those two particular species are competing for all the same living space. They want high areas that are away from things and only accessible through flight. There are only so many mountain ranges and so many places in those mountain ranges in Chult where that's feasible, especially given the weather and everything else like that. So yeah, like that part 100% makes sense. Yes, 2 thumbs up. You couldn't see that other thumb up, but there was one. And a little bit of spoilers here for Tomb of Annihilation if you haven't played it yet. They act as the main monsters for one of the sites in the adventures. No names, no pactorals. I'm not going to say which one, but they are one of the potential places you can find while you're doing the hex crawl. Part of that adventure involves them quite heavily, and the guide that you choose will try to get you to deal with them. And they're part of a clearance mission in another section where you encounter one of the major NPCs and they want a nest of them wiped out. And aside from that, and I don't mind spoiling this part, that apparently they were powerful enough to down a Helruin airship, which is a pretty serious go, because Helruins are extremely well equipped, very magically powerful, and their airships are very durable. And enough Pterafolk managed to hammer this one that it went down, and you can actually go find its wreckage up in the trees. I don't mind spoiling that part, because it's not like there's no sort of mission around it. It's just something you encounter. Not going to say where, but it's out there. So that's it for spoilers out of it, and that's how they act in the game. They're also available as a random encounter, but just about everything is, so that's neither here nor there really. The next one is that, like the undead, they were a key foe in the past, and they really got a short stick in the latest edition. They've also lost their ability to transform. Their previously natural ability to transform has been retconned as being a ritual that they had to do or had to undergo in order to get those powers, and they've forgotten it or something's happened, and so now they're all stuck in the baseline form, which is a taller than average and thinner lizard man with arm wings and a pteranodon head. Whereas previously they had that form, the actual tiny pteranodon, and then had a tailless lizardfolk form where they appeared as a slightly taller than average lizardfolk with no tail and a pteranodon head. So they've lost their powers, and I suspect that's because in the inspection of the lore going into this, they only really sort of hit the third edition stuff, and we're like, okay, they've got this connection to spirit nagas and divine magic. Maybe it's a ritual that gives them these transformation powers or something like that. That's guesswork on my part. Another thing is that they've also been disassociated from a lot of their third edition improvements. They're back to sort of being where did they come from? What are they? And yeah, like it's a really strange situation in fifth. They've like wiped a lot of the stuff from almost everything from third, and only brought forward some of the more confusing aspects from second. And they've been downgraded from an actual threat to a bit of a scary looking pop-up target for the adventurers to engage. So that's their history through editions. Well, so let's take a look at their actual history in the campaign setting. So Now this is a direct quote from the Serpent Kingdoms. A Pterafolk resembles a larger than normal lizardfolk with no tail. Its small, smooth scales range in color from olive green to shades of tan. Its hands and feet are long and thin, ending in sharp talons. Ordinarily, it does not have wings, but when it has need of flight, it can either turn its arms into leathery wings or assume the form of a small pteranodon. And as I said, this is a natural ability in 2nd and 3rd edition and becomes a lost ritual in 5th. What we do know is that there are 2 firm dates associated with the Pterafolk. One is that they were created at some point after minus 34,800 Dale Reckoning. So this is way back to the days of Thunder. And they were created by the Mareschalk Saruk. So the Mareschalk Empire, which used to occupy pretty much like all of what would become the Chultan Peninsula and some of the mainland and all that sort of thing. They're the group that created the Pterafolk, which explains their extreme locality. They are not a monster you'll find across the entire realms. They are found just in Chult and on the peninsula. And this explains why. And presumably at some point after this creation, they are paired with spirit nagas as kind of a handler or leader. And yeah, like this is a big thing because apparently they have trouble controlling them, which I'll come to later. And I'd just like to thank Danny Hartel there. Thank you very much. That's awesome. I will keep trying to do this forever, or at least until like I don't know, I'm a brain in a jar or something, and I might slow down a bit. Anyways, though, so that's the first firm date we have for them. The last firm date we have for them for anything prior to 1491-ish, which is when Tomb of Annihilation may be happening, is 1358 Dale Reckoning. So that is the time of troubles when the High God Ao says, all right, everybody out of the pool, you done messed up, I'm finished with you, and kicks everybody out. And they're not named in this time specifically, but it's something that happens to them, which I feel is both awesome and much in need of mentioning. And so they were actually set to just chill out and enjoy a quiet time of troubles. I mean, Abtao was off doing his thing, other stuff was happening, but they were cool. They were good. Until fire newts. Kosuth, the elemental god of fire, like the chief elemental of fire, true neutral, just all about burning stuff, is apparently gets relegated down like everybody else and decides to take a fire newt as his avatar. And then after taking that fire newt as an avatar, decides the best way that Kosuth can spend their time on Faerun is to go on a tear and literally just like smash in and destroy the Pterafolk. So you have an army of fire newts and their crazy, the crazy cavalry they have and their magic and everything else forms under the Peaks of Flame, which are just sort of like southwest of the Sky Lizard Mountains, which is where the bulk of the Pterafolk live. And for a full year, an Avatar-led army of fire newts wages a non-stop war against the Pterafolk for no other reason than why not? And they managed to somehow survive this. Likely because it was very difficult to get to a lot of their nests and whatnot, but like seriously, that is insane. You very seldom in Forgotten Realms do you get legit monster on monster folk battles or wars, and this is one that went down. And I had no idea about it prior to doing the research for Chult and Pterafolk and all that sort of stuff. It's just like sort of not mentioned anywhere, and it's not associated with anything, and sort of like compared to some of the other events that happened at the same time. Like it's easy to miss out on. So yeah. So for a full year this goes on, and then after that Kossuth leaves, goes back to the elemental planes. Everything goes back to normal. The Pterafolk start to rebuild. And then he reanimates the charred cadaver that he had occupied as an avatar and sends him back as a death flame, which is a kind of horrifying fire version of a death knight to rule over that particular group of fire newts. And so that's going to be coming up a lot in the fire newt episode. But the key thing to remember after this is that even after all that craziness, all that battle, all that harrowing action, they still make up 4% of the Chultan Peninsula's population after that. And that is a big point. So what do we do know about them within their history without any sort of like dates involved? Well, their best origin, as far as I'm concerned, and the rest of information all come from 3rd edition. And a lot of this is coming from that beautiful tome of knowledge that I love so much, the Serpent Kingdoms, which, if you're working in the south of Faerun, get that book. Buy the PDF of it. It's invaluable. But enough of that. So the Sorc created them after the Asabi and the Lizardfolk, and used Lizardfolk as the baseline, which explains their morphology and similarities. It's like a Lizardfolk, but with appearance. Now, there's some disagreement in the material over whether they're easily controllable or not, because some of it treats it like they were easily controlled, others notes that it was difficult for them. And the take that I get from that is that they were harder to control than the Lizardfolk and Asabi that were created prior to them, because unlike the Lizardfolk and Asabi, which were sort of created as general purpose drones, for lack of a better description, by the Suruk, the Asabi were their first shot at making a bioweapon. Now, I talked about this before with the Yuan-Ti, how the Yuan-Ti strike me very much as a bioweapon. Reading into the Pterafolk information, the vibe that I got from it was that they were the Marshalk Suruk's first attempt at creating a dedicated warrior unit to help prosecute their war against Ubteo and his dinosaurs and his forces, and later Coatls and all that jazz. So it sort of explains a lot about them. Why are they so aggressive? Why are they so kill-oriented? All that sort of thing. The reason is because they were designed for warfare. They were designed for conflict. And this, further, it makes their pairing with Spirit Nagas make sense. They essentially needed officers. They needed controllers who could be there on the ground and do the same thing like Soviet air controllers did, forward air controllers did back in the day, and direct them in battle while providing some level of reliable, intelligent, tactical acumen, which is where the Spirit Nagas would come in. And this sort of like rolls into explaining a lot about the Yuan-Ti, and I'll get into that in a bit. About why the Yuan-Ti are the way they are. So we also know that culturally, they're an evil monster nonsense mess. Their culture as it is isn't conducive to survival at all. It is described in various ways as savage, brutal, prone to violence, and yet they also mate for life, and all that stuff I talked about. It just doesn't make good sense for a social organization that has to live together to survive, and especially if they're being created as combatants and they need to be used as most effectively as groups. They're going to need to have that sort of organization to them. So then there's some stuff, based on things we know about them that we can kind of surmise. For one, they're predators, and interestingly, they are not humanoid eating predators like the Lizardfolk are. They only eat large, like megafauna and dinosaurs and stuff like that. So they're not actually hunting people. That's more of a keeping people out of their territory when they kill them. The main place they live is the Sky Lizard Mountains. It's sort of I'm going to go with that's an obvious one. It was likely seized after Ubteo went MIA. And I say that because prior to him going missing, the detente location between the Marishalk and later Serpentes and all those sorts of groups was along the Hazar Mountains. So basically it was like partway into Thindle. This sees them much, much deeper into territory that is very much Obteo's within the lore. And so my guess is that after the Thingth are defeated, after the Civil War between the Ashowe and the Tabaxi is over, that's when you see all of a sudden this huge influx of Pterafolk into the region who just set up shop in the Sky Lizard Mountains, and the place ends up being called after them. And what's another sort of interesting thing about them is they appear to be actually be part of the ecosystem, that they fill a niche within it and are actually preyed upon by larger pteranodons, like proper dinosaurs, which kind of sucks for them, but that's what you get. And the last thing that we know about them, historically speaking, is that they appear to fill in the blanks of their culture based on whatever cultures they can observe around them. So if they have human cultures nearby or dwarf cultures nearby, they'll begin to emulate aspects of those cultures to fill in the gaps of their own, because they were originally created to be sort of like war machines. So they do that instead of develop on their own, which I think is a bit weird, but hey, that happens. So the current state and the setting, it is it's not great. In previous editions, they were a legit threat. They were very dangerous to run into. They had some very cool powers, and they weren't the most dangerous thing, but they were unique and could fill a number of niches and roles all at once, which was cool. As of Tomb of Annihilation, they're barely more of a clear the monster from Area X, creature of the week sort of thing. Like, you'll encounter them in you'll encounter them in two places where they are part of the actual, the campaign in those places, if you go to those places. And anywhere else, they're just like a pop-up target that'll happen when you're having a random roll encounter. Mix in that they've lost the bulk of their powers and versatility. Pardon me. And it's a pretty grim picture. They went from being able to survive a Kothuth Avatar-led war against them by fire newts to being like Lizardfolk with wings who aren't very actually scary. Like calling them Pterafolk just doesn't really fit anymore. And so now the fun part, my take on how it could be done and how things could be improved and brought forward in such a way that it improves everything. Not improves everything, but makes them more viable and makes them more vibrant and usable for the game. And so they were a fantastic adversary in the past. Their current state's not great, and they're suffering from a lot of the typical D&D ailments from monster folk, from a non-functioning culture standpoint. And unlike a lot of monsters, they actually saw their abilities dramatically altered, and not for the better, coming into the latest edition. So first and foremost, I would give them back their shape-changing abilities. They were key to what made them such a potentially useful and potent adversary. And making it into a ritual, it didn't make very much sense because as presented, they don't really have a culture, especially in the 2nd edition and 5th edition contexts of how they're presented. They don't have a culture that could retain a ritual long enough for it to be remembered by anybody. Like, it would be something they had for like a handful of minutes before they decided not to share it with anybody else. And now everybody's stuck in this one form. And that's no fun. Have it as a natural ability, and what this actually lets you do past that is it turns them into a prototype for the Yuan-Ti shapeshifting. And that's what's coming up next here is the Restore the Suruk link. By themselves, the Pterafolk are okay opponents. Linked into that sweet Suruk creation list and paired with Spirit Naga leaders, they're at least 108% more fearsome and dangerous to encounter. Plus, their difficult to control aspect. After giving it some thought, what I nailed down was that, at least in my own headcanon, what I've surmised is that the Yuan-Ti, the Sirach, when they created the first, when they created the Asabi, they created the Lizardfolk, eventually create the troglodytes to explore underground, all that sort of thing. They wanted general purpose units. Like, they can do labor, they can do combat, they can do a bunch of stuff, and we do most of their thinking, and we don't really worry about it. Then they got involved in a conflict with Pteo. Pteo and his various forces are stopping them from their westward expansion and further into Chult, where they want to be. So now they're in war, now they're on a war footing. They need to do something more. So let's create ourselves an actual combatant. So they create the Pterafolk. Now, the Pterafolk are a whole bunch of firsts all at once. They're a prototype that they decided to just run with. And so they take some Lizardfolk, they magically transmute them, they do a whole bunch of things to them, make them a little smarter, make them a little meaner, stronger, give them some abilities, limited transformational abilities, because after all, they're Sirach, they have transformational abilities. So they do this, and they unleash the Pterafolk, and it's fantastic. They're killing all sorts of stuff, but they are harder to control than the Lizardfolk and Asabi and others who just sort of fall in line immediately. When they tell a Pterafolk to stop, it might stop. It might do it for a while longer, then stop. It's sort of like having a hyper-violent scaled toddler with murder wings or something like that. It's bad news. So the Sirach learned from this. They don't stop they probably stop making Pterafolk, because Pterafolk can reproduce in and amongst themselves, which is what they continue to do. So they're a self-replicating force. But what they do is oh my god, what am I, like 8? Anyways, what they do is when they build the Yuan-Ti, they take a different approach. Instead of creating a single monster who can transform a little bit to do fighting, they give them a few more transformation abilities. They create a few different levels of them to allow them to do more things. Basically, they try to replicate the pyramid that they exist at the top of in micro form with the Yuan-Ti to create a self-contained fighting force that is capable of independent action and thought and all that sort of good stuff. But they've learned they don't want to have to deal with rebellious, intelligent, like hyper-intelligent monsters underneath them. So they add in the inherent obey coding. And, I talked about this with the Yuan-Ti, how they can hear the Sirach coming back. They can feel their old master's call, and they can't say no. So that they add that in. And then they give themselves that kill switch, because as much as I would love the Sirach to be able to just transmute and warp any of their creations at will, it's very specific that the only group they can do it to is the Yuan-Ti. And so with this, the Sirach add in a kill switch to keep the Yuan-Ti in line, because they know they can't trust the Yuan-Ti. They absolutely know, 100%. If left to their own devices, the Yuan-Ti will betray them and try to set themselves up as being in charge, which is exactly what Yuan-Ti do. So they put this kill switch into them, which allows them to transmute them at will. And there's not even a mechanic offered for it in the game. They can literally just look at any Yuan-Ti or any number of Yuan-Ti and turn them inside out, or transform them into something that that oxygen is toxic to. And so that's the kill switch they add in. And this is awesome. Well, it's not awesome with the Yuan-Ti, but this is awesome because this lets us develop and build on the Pterafolk more, because one of the great science fiction tropes that I love, even though it's dumb as hell, is I love the idea of prototypes getting jealous of the production models. of things. And this is one of those situations where that works, and it's biomagic instead of technology. So you have a situation here where the Yuan Ti, now they're on the scene, and they're the new favorites of the Surrak. And the Pterafolk hate it. The Pterafolk, I think there should be an enmity to toss in between them and the Yuan Ti, because the Yuan Ti technically are able to order them around and all that sort of stuff, and probably do, because the Yuan Ti consider like every scaled race below them. But the two of them they hate each other with an absolute passion. The Pterafolk hate them because they see the Yuan Ti as having usurped their position as the master's favorites. And the Yuan Ti just see them as, like an experimental, or at least saw them in the distant past, saw them as like this experimental thing that was created that just doesn't serve any purpose anymore. And now they're on the scene and they're better. So, whatever, we'll just order you guys around. And so the way I'd see this playing out in game would be the Yuan Ti see and treat them as inferiors for reasons I can't really fully remember. Only sort of like the oldest Yuan Ti, or those with like access to the deepest sort of archives where they can read about what happened before the Surrak all disappeared and stuff like that. They'd know, but the rest of them are like, oh yeah, these guys are just whatever. We'll treat them however we want to. Meanwhile, the Pterafolk just hate the Yuan Ti for usurping their place as premier weapons of the Surrak, and this would be especially notable in groups that still have a Spirit Naga in charge of them, or that have had that continuous influence going on. And this could tie into like a subplot, like if you're doing like Surrak Resurrection in your game. This could tie in beautifully if you're doing it in this area, because you could see Yuan Ti trying to stop their old masters from returning and taking their freedom away. Meanwhile, you could also see Pterafolk, led by their Spirit Nagas, trying to make it happen in a bid to get back to being the favorites of the Surrak. So there's a few options that opens up there. Now, the next idea I have for them is free nests, and it's notable that the Pterafolk don't target humanoids. And during the era of upheaval, that whole period from the Spell Plague until the Second Sundering, there may have been some serious changes in some of the Surrak settlements, owing to the radically altered landscape and food resources changing, because the Chultan Peninsula becomes the Mare Archipelago in 4th edition. And so you've got isolated pockets of everything all over the place there, on islands, islets, all that sort of stuff. And so this may, in my mind, warrant the creation of a subspecies who, they've lost their Spirit Nagas and have had to adapt and overcome these sorts of situations. And these would be the free nests. These are located around coastlines that are on islands. You could maybe move their alignment from neutral evil assumed to neutral, more in line with Lizardfolk, simply because they're changing. They're forcing themselves to adapt. Maybe give them different coloration because now they're hunting over water, and they're more aquatic oriented. And if you're really feeling it, you might even have them join pirate crews to gain access to resources they otherwise wouldn't have. But, of course, keep the Yuan Ti hating thing going on. Like, that's just... I just really love that idea. Next thing, keep the conflict going. The Fire Newt Pterafolk War in the Chultangar and Sky Lizard Mountains is just too damn awesome to close down 100%. Is the war over? Sure. Yeah, the war ended over 100 years ago. Is there still conflict between the two? Absolutely. I mean, you've got a death flame, so like the equivalent, like an elemental fire templated death knight that was the avatar of Kosuth, leading one of the major Fire Newt groups in Chult. I can't see him just figuring, we killed some of them, I guess we could just forget about the rest. Like, no. Death Knights, that's not how they roll. So I think it would add a whole fun new dimension to that region, like between the Peaks of Flame and the Sky Lizard Mountains, and in the jungle in that area, the Chultangar, which is the forest of, pardon me, the is it Forest of Dread or Jungle of Dread? Valley of Dread. I was completely off. So now all of a sudden, in addition to Yuan Ti trying to infiltrate through that area, and possibly player characters trying to get in through that area, and Lizardfolk being there, and all sorts of other craziness, there's a literal low, let's say, low or medium intensity conflict going on constantly between fire newts and the Pterafolk in that area. It just brings a whole bunch of stuff to the area. It allows for more use of the fire newts. It allows for more use of the Pterafolk. It also gives a whole bunch of new problems out to the people fleeing from Omu and those places, because there were humans in the area, and now what are they going to do? They've got one hand, they've got fire using fire newts smashing through the place with with their crazy birds, the striders they have there, and on the other hand, they've got Pterafolk desperately trying to stave off all these fiery lunatics. So I think that makes the area a little more interesting. Next was to bring them in, so to speak. Let them be mercenaries and specialists alongside the Lizardfolk in the area. I think it's a natural progression that they could have. I mean, after all, they were created for war. And so what better way to get things that you need or want, especially if you're being influenced by other cultures, than to, use your natural abilities to go fight for them. It seems to be a pretty regular thing that happens in Forgotten Realms, and I think it opens up some venues and some more options, not the least of which are less combat-oriented interactions between characters and them. And also it starts to make things like, the rare appearances of Pterafolk in places like Port Nyanzaru and other locations more sensible. Why are they there? These are the Pterafolk. People are supposed to be afraid of them. Oh, okay, well, some of them are mercenaries, so now they're just kind of when you see the hobgoblin troops in town or something, you're oh yeah, stay away from them. They're dangerous, but as long as you pay them, everything's fine. Let's see here. The comments here. Let's see here. Balancing the Pterafolk's rebellious nature against their jealousy of losing favor is a good way to add depth. So, I think it is. And it also, just makes it more fun. And yeah, absolutely, yeah, it gives them a better reason to fight other than just because. I hate just because being the reason that anything happens in games. I feel that it is the worst sort of creative cop-out for why something's doing something. Let's see here, traditional training for some forgotten food. Yeah, that's entirely possible too. Sending them out to fight as mercenaries. Perhaps that's what they do with their young. They send them out to go merking for a little while to see what's going on, learn about the world, and bring back some things that they'll need back at their settlements. So the next part is fix their culture. I get it. D&D loves its monsters to be 100% awful, 24/7, 365 days of the year, whatever their calendar cycle is in the individual setting. The problem is that when you do that, as has come out, especially 5th edition, they're really going after the 3 pillars approach to gaming, in that there's combat, social interaction, and exploration. These are the 3 pillars of D&D. And when you have monster folk, and I use the term monster folk because I feel it's a legitimate term for these guys, when you have them and they are all intrinsically evil and they have a non-functional society, they don't hold those 3 pillars up. In reality, you end up with social interaction gets truncated, exploration, same thing, shortened or destroyed, and only really the combat pillar remains, because these things are always going to be hostile. They're almost always going to attack, and there's no point talking to them. You might try once or twice, and then screw it. We'll just fight these guys. So, Can they be evil? Yeah, absolutely. Like, to me, they feel like malevolent or malign Lizardfolk variant, which is, basically what they were when they were made by the Sirach. So like evil, yes, but make it functional evil. Like, yeah, have them be awful, but have them be awful in a way that actually lets them survive and thrive to the point where, as in third edition, they said, they're 4% of the population of the Chultan Peninsula and Chult. Like, that's huge. Like, that is a lot of Pterafolk. Okay, like pairing them with Spirit Nagas, it helps a bit. They're there to, be, that voice of reason. They're more intelligent. They've got more abilities, more planning powers, all that sort of stuff. But I think that like 3 cultures might do the trick here. Pardon me. So 1 is where they have their Naga and they're happy and doing their thing. 1 is where they're a little bit wilder, a little bit more feral, and they're trying to find a Naga to get back in order. So like these would be the sort of like the ones that you encounter, like random encounters, and they're less settled, they're more a little more crazy, less strategic, more like immediate tactical sort of thing. And then finally, as I talked about with the free ones, have some that are free. They don't want a Naga, they don't want to go back to all that stuff. They've managed to move past their elementary programming the Sirach gave them. Which is, something that I think is a great idea. Now all of a sudden, when you're encountering them, maybe these ones are hostile, maybe these ones aren't hostile, maybe these ones can be bribed to move through their territory instead of, having to fight them every other hex or something like that. And these ones on the coast, they're awesome, they're on side. So, options, variability, nuance, those are the things that uphold these 3 pillars. And right now they don't really have it. And I think by doing the things I just talked about, you'll get that. And yeah, the last thing I would do, and this is like especially more involved with the Tomb of Annihilation itself. So if you're doing that campaign, is to add in a ton of antagonisms between them and the Yuan Ti who are trying to infiltrate into Chult proper via the Chultangar, and the ones that are like down in Omu causing all that trouble, and with Raznisi and all that sort of thing. Okay, this gives an awesome chance, that whole social interaction thing right here. Okay, they hate the Yuan Ti. They hate what the Yuan Ti are doing. They know what the Yuan Ti are doing is bad and may potentially end the world, and they like being on it. Maybe they help the player characters. Maybe they hire the player characters. Maybe they, in some manner, help facilitate the destruction of the Yuan Ti who are coming through this area. It's just a thought. It's an option. Add a little something to your game. Have a little fun with it. That sort of thing. And let's see here. Enemy of enemy works well. Absolutely. And for these guys, like, they have nothing but time. They're not like they don't care. Yeah, we might have to kill these guys later, but if we can get them to kill a whole bunch of Yuan Ti right now, I will help them. I will guide them. They might even fly the characters in, which I think would be pretty cool. Because you get like a whole bunch of Pterafolk swooping in, carrying the characters, and like drop them off, right into the dead center where they need to be in Omu or something like that. So I think that'd be pretty cool. And like, I just imagine the visual for that, and it's yeah, I'm liking that even more. So that's it for this tonight. It is a little bit of a shorter episode. I'm getting over a horrific cold that I caught after my beautiful daughter, whom I love, sneezed on me last weekend. I love her, but man, she just, I don't know how kids generate germs like this. So, this is a little bit of a shorter episode tonight because I can't keep talking. My throat's starting to give out on me, and my cold medication is starting to wear off. So, next episode, we'll be finally finishing the epic and multi-layered, multi-episode examination of the scaled races. We're going to be looking at the Naga of Chult, because there's a whole bunch of them going on. There's bone Nagas, there's spirit Nagas, there's good ones, there's evil ones. There's tie-ins between them and the Sirach, and them and the Ashoway, who I covered way back in episode 1. So there's all sorts of things going on with them. It's going to be an awesome episode. I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, that's it for tonight. Thank you very much for listening. This has been Lord Iver, the POCGamer podcast. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe. So, when this is up on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you're watching this on Twitch, please follow me. If you want to see more, head over to my blog, POCGamer.com, and check out my stuff on social media. I'm very active on Twitter, a little bit active on Instagram. I've got stuff cropping up on Facebook again. Just search for POCGamer, and you will find me. And if you'd like to support this broadcast, there's links to the Ko-Fi on my blog and on my social media. Music today was provided by purple-planet.com. Thanks again for listening, and have a great day.